Hi, hello, I'm Sam Harrison. I read, review and discuss fantasy and science fiction books, and today we're reviewing Lux by Steven Bohls and Brandon Sanderson. So this is a co-authored sequel to, sidequel to the Reckoners series. It's the currently most recently released Reckoners thing, and from what I remember of the state of Sanderson and other stuff, that there's no planned future Reckoners content, and it doesn't seem like there's a sequel to Lux planned, which is really a shame. So this is an audio first production, and I didn't read a single page of it. I only audio booked it. It was actually free for a while on the Audible catalog thingy if you had Audible credits or subscription currently active. I don't know whether it is anymore. I don't know whether I paid for it or not. I picked it up months ago when I was going through the Reckoners stuff, and I'm not gonna lie, I can't remember whether I paid for it or got it from the premium catalogue. But I know that a lot of Brandon's audio first stuff is on that premium catalogue, so if you're interested, there is like tons of stuff. Anyway, this is going to be a non-spoiler review. No, actually, I don't need to discuss any of the other Reckoners books, because this, while I was saying this is a sidequel, so it is set between books 1 and 3. So events that are... It takes place after book 1. Well, actually, long story short, this covers a lot of time in the main character Jax's life. So go from him being like 11 or 12 all the way up through to being a young adult in his like early 20s, I think. So we've got both flashbacks from before book 1. We have flashbacks that kind of carry us through book 1 and 2, and then a large chunk of the book takes place during book 3, because basically something that happened, there's kind of a big event in book 3 of the Reckoners, and that also, it's hard to say it takes place in Lux as well, but like something similar happens. No, the thing does happen, but they don't like cause it, they just see it happen because it's such a big event. Long story short, you don't need to have read any of the Reckoners books to read Lux, and I do actually think that Lux doesn't really spoil the other books. Some of the biggest stuff in the other books, like the biggest kind of twists and surprises, aren't really gone over by Lux because the characters are so separate. So it's called a Texas Reckoners tale, or Texas Reckoners story, or whatever. And the concept of this is that the Lux characters are like a separate team of Reckoners. So in the main books you have Prof, David, Abraham, Megan, Cody, and Tia as the like main Reckoners in those books. And in these books we have an entirely new cast. So we have I think her name is Abigail. We have there's a dude whose name begins with B. It's like a nickname, not a real name. And then we've got like Jax, who's the main character, and Wade, who's like a hacker, and Paige, who's she's kind of filling the Megan role. She is the love interest, but also she's kind of got something interesting going on about her as well through the book. Anyway, so I'll let you know up front that I think this book is totally on a par with the others quality-wise. The one thing I would say is that despite me not being able to remember any of their names, I do actually think I liked the characters more. My memory of their names is probably because I have started reading a Wheel of Time book since finishing it, and you guys know what the Wheel of Time books are like for names. Every time I'm like, what was the name of that character? Pedro Nile? No. And, so I'm kind of stuck with being like force-fed 1,000 names. Even in the first chapter of this book were like hundreds of name characters. Anyway, Lux is a lot simpler. So the Reckoner's world, if you're not aware, is Brandon Sanderson's kind of take on a supervillain post-apocalypse. So we are in a world where superhumans exist and they're basically all evil. There are no real good guys, and all of the main characters are humans with no powers trying to stand up to these epics, these evil supervillains. And the main character, Jax, is the subject of multiple tragedies in the same day when the superhumans kind of start to break out. And it's the way that it's handled in the flashback stuff is really well done. And then you kind of shift onto what happens to him after that, how he trains, how he like pushes himself to become the best he can be in terms of being a Reckoner, so that he can take his, for lack of a better word, take revenge on the epics that have ruined his life and killed his family. And I did really enjoy, I really enjoyed the whole book, to be honest. It's a really fun audio experience. I listened to it mostly while going out on runs and long walks, and genuinely made all of those, the tough runs feel short and the long runs and the long walks feel fun. And I really liked the characters, which I've said that already. But I think that the structure of the book, where it kind of starts in media res and then flashes back to the very beginning of Jax's kind of interaction with epics, and then follows him through his youth and his training at the Reckoner training facility, I really enjoyed all of that. There is a bit of a risk that if you're mega anti Mary Sue, Gary Stu, you won't like Jax that much, because he is one of those good at everything characters. The counterpoint that I have for that is that you do see how Jax gets there. So he's not just like he's the best because this particular thing about his background makes him super good at the thing that we're trying to do. Like, that's kind of an issue with Red Rising, where like Darrow is a bit of a Gary Stu because his background makes him XYZ good enough to do all these things, whereas with Jax, he's just a normal guy who has applied himself. He's very Batman-y, very much like he's taught himself all of these things. He's had these trainers to teach him, combat and kind of all these books and equipment and stuff to teach himself the like Reckoner technology stuff. So yeah, really interesting way to kind of, if you're super sensitive to Gary's two characters, I would say this might not be your 100% bag. The thing that I would say though is that for me, I only really recognised that Jax was kind of a Gary Stu looking back at the book. So looking at going back and going like, actually that's what was going on. And then the majority of the rest of the book is spent on Lux, which is a floating city that is flying in the skies above Texas. And it is kind of controlled by multiple epics that are kind of all subservient to this one main epic called Life Force. You get the book was originally going to be 3 novellas, and when you read the book, you can kind of feel where those splits are. So the kind of like the backstory is like novella 1, the like boarding of Lux and kind of coming into first contact with these epics and like kind of a bit of a mini boss fight is where you would see novella 2, and then novella 3 is like the final assault and the big climactic ending. It's interesting because I do feel like the first 2 novellas, if this had been released as a novella series, the first 2 novellas would have probably been a little bit weak, which is why I imagine they pulled them together, because it works really well as a 3-act story, but I don't know if it would have worked as well if it was 3 single stories, because those... It's difficult, because in many, like, if you look at a lot of books, the first book is still a satisfying beginning, middle and end, in a way that I don't think that these novellas would have been, because there's too much dangling for the next books, which maybe was the cause of it being re-edited into this full book. But for me, I think that the full novel format definitely works better for Lux. And again, if you can listen to this via Audible or audio or whatever audio platform you've got, I would recommend it. It's on Spotify. It's only like 13 hours, so you should be able to fit it in your Spotify monthly minutes. So yeah, Lux. I ended up rating this one 3 stars or 4 stars. I don't know. I really enjoyed the experience. I did read it over a much more protracted period than I normally do. So with most books, I tend to binge read them. But because I was saving this for runs and walks, I ended up listening to it over like 2 or 3 weeks. And while I did really enjoy it, possibly the protracted nature of how I listened to it ended up being a bit of a detriment. I started and finished 2 books within the time that I was reading it, and one of those books was a 1,000+ page of Empires and Dust. So a lot. It might have suffered by the way that I read it, and maybe I'd be giving it a 4 out of 5 if I had binge read it. And when I think back on my experience of it, I do think back on a really high quality, enjoyable read. And if you're the kind of person who is looking for that kind of audiobook where you're like, oh, I just want something that's fun and fast paced, and you like Brandon Sanderson's writing, this admittedly is co-authored, so I believe that most of the writing was done by Steven Bohls, but kind of guidance, world building, things like that come from Brandon. But Steven Bohls has aped the Sanderson prose. It's not flowery or overly descriptive. It is kind of workmanlike and accessible in exactly the right way, I think. And it is very good as a kind of, I'm doing chores, I'm going for a run, I'm taking the trash out, like that kind of audiobook. It has great short little chapters, so you can just kind of listen for a bit and then step away. Really, really enjoyed this as an audio experience, and would highly recommend this particular book if you're after that sort of thing. If you're a fan of the Reckoners books, or you're a fan of like superhero storytelling, stuff like X-Men really works here, because it's kind of like a young team book. They do have older mentor characters, but really the young characters are the main people here. What's interesting is we do get some villain POVs in this book. So in all the other Reckoner books, they are first-person single point of view, but in this book, we do also get the villain POV. So you get quite a few POVs from Life Force, the main villain of Lux. And I really enjoyed those chapters as well. They provided a really good break. So by the time we started getting those weaved in later in later in the book, they provided a really good break, and they were written in a really different way, because obviously Life Force sees the world in a very different way. He's an epic. He's got this kind of he's got this interesting relationship with death because of his powers. And he's also got, he's kind of been experimenting on himself, using like other epic DNA, and a lot of that is really interesting and really well done. The one major negative I have with this book is that when it ends, the ending of this book is kind of a huge cliffhanger. So the story of Lux is taken care of, but there's a huge cliffhanger for a sequel here. So there's a lot of setup for what's coming next from the Reckoners universe, but there is nothing next. So I did a little bit of Googling around just before I recorded this video, and like, there's been no announcements about Reckoners since 2021. Apparently Brandon was maybe folding the Reckoners into another crossover YA series that was going to cross all his YA books together, called Apocalypse Guard, but he's since taken the rights back from the publisher and isn't really working on it right now. And he's got Dan Wells involved on writing that as well. I don't want to take Brandon away from the Cosmere, because the Cosmere isn't going to be done for like 20 years or whatever, and we've got like 20 more books to go into the Cosmere, and I don't want to say like, Brandon should put down the Cosmere and start writing these Reckoners books because I like them, but I would love if Steven Bohls would carry on writing these books with Brandon's permission and guidance, because they do set up a really big and interesting cliffhanger. So maybe not even a cliffhanger, but like the epilogue is quite long, and it's like a huge hook for a future book. And we don't currently know if that's ever going to, like, if anything's going to come of that. And I would really like to see stories told in the Reckoners world post-Calamity, because there's so much room for new and interesting styles of story post-Calamity that that couldn't have been told before. So if you've read Calamity and you know how the world is left at the end, you know that there's so much more that could happen. And I would love to see the Texas Reckoners meet the Chicago Reckoners. I'd like to see the Jax David meeting. It would be fantastic. Here's my pitch, right? We get a co-authored book, Brandon and Steven. Brandon writes the David chapters and Steven writes the Jax chapters. And we get dual POVs. And we get kind of more of an expanded, longer book. With those two characters working together to take down the new emerging villain that comes out at the end of this book. So that's my pitch. That's what I would like. This is currently, as I said, the final Reckoners thing, which means I'm actually up to date. And so not even up to date. I'm done. I've read everything Reckoners. So I would love to see more, because I do love this universe. I love the way that Brandon has put together the power sets and how they interact. One of the things that Brandon often does in his magic systems is he takes an idea and then he'd be like, right, okay, but extrapolated to the logical extreme, you could do this. And that's something you actually see in X-Men a lot as well. So you'll be like, okay, so if Magneto can do this, then he can pull a meteor out of the sky. Like, people will take powers in superhero comics to their theoretical limits and beyond. And that's a big thing that Brandon does in all of his books, but especially well in the Reckoners. And I really enjoyed that, especially seeing the stuff with Prof and the tensors and those kinds of abilities. Seeing those taken to the logical limits was really, really cool and impressive. And I would like to see more of that, because like, magic in a magical world is interesting, but magic or superhero abilities in our world is interesting in its own way. And seeing those abilities interact with things that I know and that I use in my daily life, I really, really enjoyed. And I would like to see also if maybe there is a push back towards a society in a kind of a post-Calamity world. I'd be interested to see how the world kind of re-knits back together, or whether it even does. So, yes, sadly, this is the last Reckoners project currently, and even sadder, it does not seem like there are any plans. There's nothing on the Steven Bohls Twitter or website or anything like that. So, if anyone knows of anything, please drop down in the comments and let me know, like, oh, there's a sequel to Lux coming that I just couldn't find when Googling. Or if there's any info on this Apocalypse Guard that I couldn't find when Googling. There are only a few Reddit threads that even mention Lux. So I mean, I assume that like 10 people are going to watch this video, and that most of those 10 will be people who have read Lux like me and are just curious what other people thought. But yeah, more Reckoners please, Brandon and Stephen. And if you've read this book, do please drop down in the comments below and let me know what you thought of it. And also, if you haven't liked this video, please like it. And finally, join our lovely little family of fantasy and sci-fi nerds over here on the channel. Click the subscribe button and come back every Monday, Wednesday and Friday for new content. Thanks. Goodbye.